That's really strange. Cameras are insane these days. I am just entirely backlit. There's just an overhead light fixture with, I think, two bulbs in it behind me in the center of the ceiling. And I was in shadow a second ago when I was setting up where the phone is. And I leaned forward to look at it a little better to see if it was too much in shadow. And then my face got lighter. And then I moved back and it stayed lighter. There's a key light that's real subtle coming from nowhere over here. Um, it's not what I was planning to make a video about. I've told this story a bunch of times. It's not really my story, um, but one of my roommates mentioned this story to me earlier, and I realized I should probably commit this one to video because it's not one I want to go to my grave with. It's actually my mother's story. My father confirmed that it's true, and told me sort of a slightly different version of it. He wasn't actually present when this happened, but I guess he knew her then, or shortly thereafter knew some of her friends from that time. In any case, my mother, whose name was Ellen, when she was in college, hung out with Jack Kerouac and Neal Cassady a number of times. And this must have been in the mid-'60s. I think Stanford in California. I meant to look this up before I made this video, but my mother did graduate work at Stanford. She never completed. And so I think that's what she was doing when this happened. And the story went, my mother lived by herself, but she had rented a big, rambling house full of rooms she basically didn't use. This was something she did her whole life. It's like she would pull this sort of Heathcliff on the Moors shit where there was always extra bedrooms. So she was renting a whole house. She didn't really need a whole house. She's by herself. And I gotta let the cat out. So my mother was living by herself in a house in California. And it was a house she rented to live in while she was in school. And it was the kind of place, it was a rental property that was used by a bunch of different short-term residents over the years. And apparently several years earlier, a while earlier, Jack Kerouac and Neal Cassady had, while stumbling drunk, scored some ungodly amount of weed. I can't remember. Like my father said, it was a pound or a half a pound, but it was a ridiculously large amount of weed. This was back when weed was illegal, but it wasn't like a widespread narcotic. It was before the 1968 drug law, so there was cheap Mexican weed. So they'd scored this ridiculous amount of weed while they were living in this house, while they were falling down drunk. Decided to the cat wants back in. So they decided to get paranoid about it and taped up the bag real good and put most of it in a hole in the yard, buried it carefully to hide it. So and then when they sobered up, they'd been so drunk that they kind of forgot it had ever happened. In fact, that's what did happen. They forgot. So, and they rented the house for like a month or something, or they were staying with friends there or something. And so later, I don't know, at least 6 months or a year later, but later, they were like, hey, oh, remember we scored that gigantic bag of weed that one night and we buried it in the yard. Let's go get it. So they showed up at the house my mother was renting and living in the middle of the night, stumbling drunk, high as kites, with shovels, started digging holes in the backyard because they couldn't remember exactly where they had buried it, and it was dark. They were trying to not wake anyone up. So My mother had no idea that these guys were celebrities. This would have been in the mid '60s, so they were celebrities. Like they were known quantities. Kerouac and Cassady. So it's Kerouac and Cassady and whatever entourage they were traveling with at that time. My mother represented it as several people. Neither of my parents ever mentioned anyone else famous being there, whoever they were with. So my mom would tell this story, and she's like, she didn't know any of this was going on. She didn't know it was Jack Kerouac. She just knew it was some people on drugs falling down drunk with shovels in the yard who kept digging up holes in the middle of the night and then filling them in really badly and leaving these weird molehills in the backyard. So like the third night that this happens and wakes my mother up at 2 a.m, she uh, gets annoyed enough to decide to get up and practice piano because at least then she won't have to listen to assholes in the yard with the shovels. So, which seems like just a weird series of decisions to make, but my mom was weird. Like the idea that she would just ignore the weirdos in the yard, like she would have figured out real quick that they weren't going to do her any harm. And, uh, and she always had an upright piano. Um, kind of a talented amateur musician, but she only ever played Chopin. She only ever played like the 7 or 8 easiest pieces in a complete Chopin's works. Maybe she had a larger repertoire. Then I don't know, but when I was a kid, she always played the same several pieces by Chopin whenever she wanted to relax playing piano. So my mother in the middle of the night gets up, starts playing piano, presumably Chopin, and the crazed beatniks in the yard, like literally came swarming in the windows. Like they came up to the house and looked in the window and decided it's a girl playing piano, fuck it, and just literally opened the windows and climbed in and introduced themselves. So that's how my mother met Jack Kerouac and Neal Cassady. And she said for like a week, because I just knew she'd put up with it. I mean, I don't think my mother was ever a speed freak, but she like waking her up in the middle of the night to hang out with her and get her to play piano and like hang out and drink wine. It's perfectly believable. She could be on a weird sleeping schedule, just like the best of us. So, yeah, my mother told me that story. I guess I must have been in my teens. And like I said, my father confirmed it at some point we were talking about it, probably when I was 21 or 22. So I don't exactly remember when I asked my mother follow-up questions, because there were a couple of rounds of like, I first heard this probably when I first read Kerouac when I was like 15, 14. I took Kerouac pretty seriously off and on. But some of this I wouldn't have been able to get out of her in this way the first go round. And some of it would have come from my father. But I did ask her at one time when it came up. Later, I asked her if Kerouac was working on anything, doing any writing. And she said he did this thing. Getting drunk at my mom's house every night for like 4, 5, 6 straight days. And then moved along, never talked to her again. One of those nights, she said Jack Kerouac came a little bit late. Sat in the corner, staring, wide-eyed at everyone with this really intense expression and just refusing to talk. Like everyone in the room is partying, they're hanging out. He's just staring really, really intently at whoever addresses him, but he's not responding in any way. Does this for like 40 minutes, and then he jumps up and leaves. Next night, he shows up, and he's got typed manuscript pages. Because what he was doing was memorizing verbatim everything everyone in the room said until he was sure his memory was full. He'd been doing this over and over, sort of practicing his memory for exact dialogue. And so he had like 20 type pages of like what everyone in the room said continuously from when he arrived to when he decided his memory was full and he left and went and typed it up like mad. He brought it and passed it around to everyone in the room the next night. And that is pretty interesting. It's like one other story worth telling it in conjunction with this. Many, many years later, I was living in Los Angeles, It was around when we made Attic Expeditions and Freezer Burn, somewhere in there. Melissa Ballin, who produced and directed Freezer Burn, was one of the producers on Attic Expeditions. She knew this other screenwriter that she was also trying to sort of groom to become a director so she could produce for him, writing and directing. His name was Robin. I don't remember his full name. But Robin had written this screenplay about the Beat writers. Several of them were. Cassady and Kerouac were characters in it, and Ginsberg. I don't know, one or two other kind of famous writers or characters in this screenplay. I want to say it was called Bongo, that Robin had written. Now, it was kind of a brilliant screenplay in some ways. I remember Melissa gave it to me to read, to give her notes on it, tell her what I thought. The long dialogue scenes where it's all these speed freak beatnik writers on their game, rapping it out at each other all night. He had nailed everyone's voice. Like there were multiple writers who were characters in the script, and he'd nailed the way they talk. And like I'd seen interviews with all these guys. I was pretty obsessed for a while. I saw every documentary I could see. So Robin had just totally nailed like these guys hanging out in a room more than once in the script. But the Hollywood structured story he decided to impose on this script. I don't know if you know these characters. You know, there was a murder that got the police interested in all of them. I don't remember the details, but they all knew somebody who got murdered, and it's like they're all these weirdo writers who hang out at this one cafe doing speed, and several of them are gay and therefore like preverts, and the cops just question them really closely about this murder of someone sort of adjacent to their social set. It's my understanding is it's one of the reasons William S. Burroughs fled the country when he accidentally killed his wife, because this other business had just happened recently, and he knew the police were gonna. He was worried about that. So Robin's script, the idea was that actually Neal Cassady committed this murder, and it was because of like weird issues that had to do with the way his ego and Kerouac's got tangled up. It felt sort of Rebel Without a Cause. At the end, he's on the run from the cops and hiding from them. Cassady is. So I just didn't think the stuff, whether it rang true or not, I don't know. But I thought, well, these people are in living memory. A few of them are still alive. None of these major players are still alive, but I'm not sure it's in good taste to imply that this guy was a murderer. A lot of people who knew him are alive. There's no reason to think. I mean, he was a criminal in certain senses. He stole cars a lot. So then I'd ask my mom about it. I asked my mom, you hung out with Neal Cassady. What do you think of this? And I explained about the turn in the story being turning out that Neal Cassady was a murderer. And my mother was never a kind or warm person toward other people in any way. I don't really have a memory of her hugging me or telling me she loves me. And she just didn't have friends the right way. She's got personality disorder. She's just a little, maybe antisocial isn't the right word, but she's distant. She kept her distance from us, my sister and I, as her kids. I just don't have memories of her being affectionate in my childhood. She loves dogs and cats. She's warm about dogs and cats. So I asked her about this thing with Cassady being a murderer in this screenplay. And she was horrified. She was just shocked. And she said, that man was one of the nicest, most decent, kindest, most wonderful people I ever met in my life. He would never have hurt a fly. And she said it in this tone that was like, I mean, I also never knew my mother after she broke up with my stepfather. I was like 9. I never knew her to date anyone. She seemed like she just sort of shrank into herself and became sexless after the second marriage collapsed. Like the way she said Neal Cassady was a great guy, it wasn't like she had a crush on him, but it was like she was won over by energy that was based in sex in a way that I never saw in my mother in any other circumstance my whole life until she died. Like Never saw her say warm things about any man like that. Not even actors in TV shows. It was like the gosh golly tone of somebody who has a crush, but it was also genuine. She really thought he was the nicest guy she ever met. Like I never heard her talk like that about anyone, and so I always thought, like, after a while, especially because Neal Cassady is a little bit of a mysterious figure historically. He's been written about. There's biographies. Uh, there's film of him a little bit, uh, but that kind of pure charisma that just wins women over. That he was that kind of guy explains a lot about his maybe not about his character, about how he got away with being the guy he was in some ways. And everybody seemed to love the guy, but that women loved him like that. And like I said, my mother didn't. This is the only time I ever saw her do anything like that, ever. um, so yeah, I'm missing something there, but yeah, I mean, I'm gonna remember the best part of the Kerouac and Cassady meeting my mom's story right after I hit stop. But anyway, yeah, one of my roommates reminded me of me last time I told that story. I told it on a Facebook post, but it's definitely worth committing to the tablets of stone that are YouTube.